Hi, I'm Ryan Douglas, the teaching pastor at the 456, and we're so grateful that you've decided to join us for the community gathering video this week. This video, if you haven't been watching these before, is a 7 to 8 minute recap of our sermon from last week, and it allows you to have a couple of discussion questions at the end that you can dialogue with your friends or your family. And so here we go. Here's what we had on tap this past Sunday. We had our theology application and prayer, our theology being that if we do not acknowledge Jesus, we do not acknowledge God. That in order to know God, it must come through knowing Jesus. Our application was we must accept the truth about Jesus so that we can know God. And then our prayer was, God, help us to have a right and true understanding of Jesus, that we might have a right and true understanding of you. You'll remember that what we talked about was in John chapter 8, there were a group of people that the Bible says believed in Jesus. They put faith in Jesus. It's a word, pistis is a word that's used a lot in the Greek. Can mean believe, can mean trust, can mean faith. There were people who were putting faith in Jesus for healing. You'll remember maybe from 2 weeks ago we talked about the crowds following Jesus in John chapter, what were we in? We were in John 6. The crowds followed Jesus because they believed he was able to heal, right? And then they followed Jesus because they believed he was able to provide food for them. And so they put faith in Jesus for certain aspects of his ability, certain aspects of what he could do for them. And yet here in John 8, Jesus is talking to a group of people who the Bible says uses the word believed. And in our culture, in most church culture, if we ask somebody, do you believe in Jesus? What we mean is, are you a Christian? Have you put faith in Jesus for salvation? It's probably not the best way for us to ask that question, quite honestly. Because like I said in the sermon Sunday, there are people all over the world who believe something about Jesus. They believed he lived, they believed he existed, they believed he was a martyr, they believed he was a good man, they believed that he was a good prophet, they believed that his teachings were moralistic and kind, whatever. They believe a lot of things about Jesus, they just don't believe he was God. And that's problematic. And the reason that's problematic is because Jesus is really explicit in John chapter 8 that if you do not believe in him as the Son of God, you do not acknowledge the Father. And so the problem is in our world, people who kind of are in this in-between place where they maybe not quite agnostic, where they're saying, I'm not sure if there's a God or not. There are a group of people in our culture who are saying, I believe that there is a God. We don't know who he is. We don't know what form he takes. Maybe you've heard somebody say it like this. I think that there's a God who's kind of on the top of the mountain, and all roads, all religions, all faiths ultimately lead to him. The Bible would absolutely disagree with that statement, because the Bible says that the only way to come to know the true God is through acknowledging who Jesus is. And so we have this maybe desire as a humanity to find something bigger than ourselves, to find something outside of ourselves. Philosophy seeks to find kind of the answers of who we are or who we're meant to be, and it's always left a little bit wanting. It's always kind of comes down to this thing of ultimately what pleases us most, or what is best for the human race, or whatever, right? Like, but it always comes to a place where it just has to stop short. We're left wondering, what is it all about? What is life? What does it matter? What comes next? These kinds of questions. And the Bible tells us that the only way to know that and to understand that is to know Jesus. That it has to come through Christ. And so we make no qualms at the 456 Church about saying that and being very direct about that. There is no other name given under heaven among men. There is no other so-called God or deity. There is no other means for righteousness. There is no other place for forgiveness. There is no other source for love. There is no other place where hope can be found. There is no other peace that can satisfy, or overwhelming joy or comfort that can be embraced, that does not come through Jesus. It all comes through Jesus. And so we cannot know God in heaven. You can know that there is a God in heaven, but you cannot know him apart from knowing Jesus. And that matters. That matters a great deal, because Our eternity is at stake. It matters a great deal because apart from Jesus, there's no life. Apart from Jesus, there is no forgiveness, there is no love, there is no justice, there is no peace, there is no joy. And so the aim of Sunday's message, and if you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, it's short, it's about 30 minutes long. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, go and listen to it. And then, you've already watched the majority of this video, you can watch it again, but go and listen to the sermon and walk through those texts and see what that 1 John 2, I think it was verse 23, see that 1 John 2:23 says that if you do not know the Son, you do not have the Father. Anyone who doesn't acknowledge Jesus doesn't acknowledge God. That it's not kind of a this or that. It's not enough to say, oh, I believe in God, I just don't believe in Jesus. It's a package deal. They cannot be broken. I wonder, certainly each of us has places in our lives where we have been convinced of something and later found out we were wrong. And I wonder what it was that set us right. We always try to ask a couple of questions to contemplate this. So here are the 3 questions for this week. 1, have you ever held a position that later proved to be wrong? Maybe it was a position, first impression of somebody. Maybe it was a belief system that you held. Maybe it was, I don't know. I mean, there are all sorts of silly myths and thoughts, and I remember I had pet snakes as a kid, and I remember in the oil field, some guys that I worked with were terrified of snakes, and we were talking about snakes one day, and there are 4 types of venomous snakes in North America. There's the rattlesnake, there's the cottonmouth, there's the coral snake, and there's the copperhead. And one guy goes, no, you forgot one, the water moccasin. And I said, well, the water moccasin and the cottonmouth are the same kind. Cottonmouth is another name for the water moccasin, and they insisted that wasn't true. And then they said that the 6th kind, they added a 6th kind later, was the crossbreeding between a bull snake and a rattlesnake. And it's funny what sometimes we believe. So first question is, have you ever held a position that later proved to be wrong? Second question is, how did you move from wrong to right? What was it? What shifted your mind? What shifted your position? What changed it for you? Then here's the third question, and this gets to the heart of it. Why do you think that people struggle with the idea that the only way to know God is to know Jesus? Why do we struggle with that? Why do we find that challenging? Listen, I know right away that just because you're watching this video doesn't mean that you land where I land. But I know this to be true, and I'm convinced of it. And we would love to continue this dialogue with you. So on tap, right, our theology from this past week is, if we do not acknowledge Jesus, we do not acknowledge God. That's the theology of John chapter 8 and 1 John chapter 2. The application is, we must accept the truth of who Jesus is to know God. And then our prayer is, God, help us to have a right and true understanding of Jesus, that we might have a right and true understanding of you. Contemplate those questions, contemplate those things, visit about them with your friends and with your family, and we look forward to catching you again soon. Have a great week.